What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be updating my top 36 running back rankings for Week 16 of the NFL season. Some shakeups with some injuries, added on a few players from the earlier in the week rankings. If you guys enjoy, smash that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. And let's look at Tier 1 here. And before we actually run through the Tier 1 players, I do just want to talk about a few injuries, players that I may be assuming are going to miss this week. So the obvious one, David Montgomery, he's missing this week. Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, both still up in the air. For these specific rankings, I'm going to be assuming they're missing. For Kamara, I feel like he's in that tier where if he's playing, you're going to start him. Kenneth Walker, I think it's a little bit shakier of a situation. Could totally see a 50-50 split with him and Charbonnet if he does play. And then also right before I'm recording this, finding out that Isaac Guerendo is unlikely to play this week, so he will not be in these rankings. But looking at Tier 1, not going to go super in-depth on these guys. We know they're the studs. Jahmyr Gibbs should see a very strong workload with no David Montgomery on a top offense. He's my running back 1. Bijan Robinson, quarterback change with Michael Penix, but I really don't think it's going to change a ton. If anything, I think it could be a positive change. Just raise the ceiling of this offense. Kirk just wasn't getting it done. It's unfortunate, but I don't think Penix is going to come in and look like significantly worse than Kirk. Obviously, there's some uncertainty with him as a rookie, but I think it's a good offensive situation. I think he, very experienced in college. I don't expect him to come in and just completely crash and burn. Then for Chase Brown, maybe not the best matchup, but he's just been ultra productive with no Zach Moss. I think regardless of matchup, he's a great play. Saquon, RB1 in points per game. Josh Jacobs, been on a touchdown tear and a favorable matchup. And then James Conner, obviously ranked higher than usual, but the matchup is just so top tier here going up against the Panthers. Now looking at Tier 2, going to start off this tier with Devon Achane. I think I bumped him up a few spots from my earlier in the week rankings. He's averaging 21.7 points per game with Tua. The rushing efficiency has not been great, but he's getting into the end zone, and the receiving usage has been really solid. Then I have Derrick Henry going up against the Steelers. Great start to the season, has definitely cooled down as of late. I'm not overly worried. He's going to have a strong workload on a good offense, but it's not great that he hasn't hit 15 plus points in his last 5 games. Also not the best matchup against the Steelers. Then I'm going to go with Zach Charbonnet going up against the Vikings. Bad matchup. The Vikings are bottom 3 in points per game allowed, but he has seen workhorse usage without Kenneth Walker. If Kenneth Walker continues to miss time, I think Zach Charbonnet is a locked-in top 10 running back. And then to close out my top 10 and Tier 2, I have James Cook. The Patriots are 7th in points per game allowed. James Cook has balled out 19 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. The next tier is going to start off with Kyren Williams taking on the Jets. His usage, pretty much the entire season has been very strong. Touchdowns, a little bit hit or miss. Receiving usage, not great. 5 receptions in his last 5 games, but on a good offense with a strong workload. I like him here as a back-end RB1. Then I have Chuba Hubbard going up against the Cardinals. Production hasn't been great as of late, under 9 points in 2 of his last 3, but he's shown some high ceiling games. I think we could expect a bounce back here from Bryce Young. Also, the Jonathan Brooks injury just opens up the backfield to be a complete workhorse like we saw earlier on in the season. After Chuba, I'm going to go with Rico Dowdle going up against the Buccaneers. Just ultra productive on the ground over his last 4 games. Continues to build on each performance. So we went for 86 rushing yards, then 112, then 131, then 149. So great production from Rico. Cowboys offense is looking better as of late. Not scared of this Buccaneers defense. After Rico, going to go with Joe Mixon. And it does feel weird having Mixon this low because he's the running back 2 in points per game. He's been great this season. This is just such a bad matchup here against the Chiefs. The Texans offense has struggled. The Chiefs are allowing the fewest points per game to the running back position, and Joe Mixon has just been super inefficient in 2 of his last 3 games, under 2 yards per carry. So, I could be wrong here. Maybe he gets in the end zone a couple of times, gets super involved as a pass catcher, but I just think the matchup kind of warrants him being outside the top 12, probably for like the first time in a long time. And then wrapping up this tier with Bucky Irving going up against the Cowboys. The Cowboys are allowing the 6th most points per game to the running back position. We know Bucky's not going to be a workhorse. You're going to have Rachaad White working his way in, but he got through a game healthy with his back injury. You're hoping he just gets healthier and healthier. Had 15 carries for 117 yards. When Bucky has been out there for a full game healthy, he has given you great fantasy production. Now we're going to move into Tier 4 with Jonathan Taylor taking on the Titans. The usage has been solid, 20 plus carries in 4 of his last 5. The fantasy production just really hasn't followed. Obviously, we all know he had like the drop touchdown or like the fumbled touchdown on the 1 yard line, just like tossed it early, which was obviously brutal. Colts offense somewhat suspect. Richardson working in on the goal line. Unfortunate to have him down here, but I think that's kind of just where we're at this point. My RB17 is going to be Aaron Jones going up against the Seahawks. Has found some consistency, 16 plus in 3 of his last 4. Obviously going to be playing on a very good Vikings offense. You're going to have Cam Akers working in, but a very solid mid-tier RB2 option. We have the second half of that Bucks committee in Rachaad White going up against the Cowboys. Like I talked about with Bucky, it's a good matchup. They pretty much split the workload 50-50 last week, and Rachaad White has 11 plus points in 7 of his last 8 games. And then we're going to close out this tier with Breece Hall. Still kind of waiting on some injury updates. There was a weird situation where he did not practice on Wednesday, but he also wasn't on the injury report, so not quite sure what's up with that. If Breece Hall ends up logging like a full practice, you can probably bump him up into tier 3. Obviously, the concern is like, is he even going to play this week? And if he does play, is he going to be taking less than 50% of the snaps and routes, which is what we did see in week 15. Still on a decent offense, could have touchdown upside, but unless we see, better, more consistent practice reports, he's going to be stuck in this like mid-tier RB2 area. Looking at tier 5, going to go with Brian Robinson going up against the Eagles. Terrible matchup. The Eagles are allowing the second fewest points per game to the running back position, but B-Rob should have solid usage. The Commanders definitely aren't the best situation to be the running back 1-4 with Jaden Daniels' legs, and then also the lack of receiving usage, especially for B-Rob, but back-end RB2 I think is fair. Then I have Tony Pollard going up against the Colts. Definitely should monitor his health here. He did not practice on Wednesday. He has been someone, though, where he's not practiced in certain weeks and he still ends up playing. On paper, it's a good matchup. The Colts are allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game. But if he continues to miss practice, Tajay Spears becomes very, very interesting. I'll get into him later, but he's coming off a pretty impressive performance in week 15. Then I have Jerome Ford. Nick Chubb done for the year. Jerome Ford could be stepping into a very strong workload. I don't love the news that Jameis is going to get replaced by Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but we did see that once Nick Chubb left, or just in the Week 15 game in general, Jerome Ford had 7 opportunities. Pierre Strong didn't get a single touch, so should be the lead back. Not super high on this offense, but clear RB1 at this point is going to be valuable. And then wrapping up this tier with Ramondre Stevenson going up against the Bills. Hasn't been great, but this is a good matchup. The Bills are allowing the 2nd most points per game to the running back position. Now we are going to shift in a pretty interesting tier 6. Some new names here getting bumped up with injuries, and then some staples who just haven't been all that productive as of late. We're going to start off with Patrick Taylor going up against the Dolphins. And I'm going to be honest, it's kind of tough to get a read on this 49ers backfield. Obviously, they've just been hit with a million injuries. CMC, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, now Isaac Guerendo. And I could see the argument that Guerendo was handling a really strong workload, pretty much took all the running back opportunities, I think, except for 2 carries for Debo in week 15. So if Patrick Taylor was the running back 2, you could just pencil in all this work for him. I'm not quite sure that is going to be the case. In week 15, he was the running back 2, but he only played 3 snaps and had 0 opportunities. So could he just step right into that role? Sure. But if they were really high on Patrick Taylor, they probably would have taken a little bit of the workload away from Guerendo and given it to him. So I could see him having a solid workload. I could also see this being a very gross split where you get Israel Abanikanda in there. You have Kyle Juszczyk getting more run, Debo Samuel getting some opportunities. So right now he's my running back 24. Don't feel great, but if you're desperate, you could do worse than the potential running back 1 for the 49ers. Then I'm going to go with Kendre Miller going up against the Packers. Obviously, this is assuming that Alvin Kamara will not play. We saw in week 15, he had 10 touches to Jamal Williams 0. So he should be the clear-cut running back 1 if Kamara cannot give it a go. Then I have DeAndre Swift going up against the Lions. 4 rough performances in a row for Swift. Could have been better in week 15, had a touchdown called back. This Lions defense is banged up. I still think he's relevant as a higher end RB3. Then I have Najee going up against the Ravens. Not a good matchup, bottom 8 in points per game allowed. They're underdogs here, which probably isn't a favorable game script, probably something that would favor a guy like Jaylen Warren, and he's coming off his worst game of the season, but he's still consistently seeing nice usage. Even if it wasn't great in week 15, they're going to want to run the ball. And so Najee, RB27, seems about right. Then I'm going to go with Isaiah Pacheco going up against the Texans. This is not a good matchup. The Texans are bottom 4 in points per game allowed, and we saw a pretty gross 50-50 split with him and Kareem Hunt. This Chiefs offense hasn't been great, so not a good matchup, not great usage, and not on a super explosive offense. Tough to get super excited about Isaiah Pacheco. Another guy who was in a very close split, Tyrone Tracy, someone whose usage had looked really solid in previous weeks, pretty much shifted to 14 opportunities for Tracy, 11 for Devin Singletary, and Singletary was the guy that got into the end zone, which was obviously frustrating. Not a great matchup here against the Falcons. This Giants offense is not very good, and if Tracy isn't like dominating the usage and dominating the red zone work, it's going to be really tough for him to have much of a floor or a ceiling with how bad this offense is. Then we're going to go with Amir Abdullah going up against the Jaguars. Unfortunately, Sincere McCormick was having some breakout performances. Looked like he was going to be their running back one to close out the season. He goes on IR with an ankle injury. Looks like Amir Abdullah is going to step back up here. It's a good matchup. Jaguars are allowing the 3rd most points per game to the running back position, but it's always tough to gauge how the Raiders are going to handle their running back room. And then we're going to close out this tier with Travis Etienne going up against the Raiders. Another team where the usage is all over the place. Travis Etienne did lead in opportunities 18-12 to Tank in week 15. It should be a competitive game, so probably the usage is going to be fairly similar, but I guess I'll just side with the guy who had more usage in week 15. And then the 7th and final tier, definitely would feel gross about playing these guys, but who knows how large your leagues are, how many flex spots you have. We're going to go Javonte Williams going up against the Chargers. Jaleel McLaughlin is out for this one, which I guess provides some sort of clarity here for the Broncos. In week 15, this was just a gross 3-headed split with Javonte, McLaughlin, and then Audric Estime. Javonte has been very unreliable. It's not a good matchup. The Chargers are allowing the 7th fewest points per game to running backs. As you can see, I also have Audric Estime as my running back 36 in this tier. So I'd be expecting a split. I would not be shocked if it was close to 50-50. Would favor Javonte, but in a not good matchup on a rushing attack that has just been brutal this season. Tough to feel great about either of these two, even with the Jaleel McLaughlin injury. After Javonte, going to go with Tajay Spears. I kind of referenced him talking about Tony Pollard. Had an impressive week 15, 4 carries for 5 yards on the ground. Did get a goal line touchdown, which is where he scored, and then also had 6 for 87 and a touchdown through the air. So that receiving usage is where he really thrived. I could see him getting more of a workload if Pollard is banged up, and if Pollard happens to miss, I think we could be vaulting up Tajay Spears into probably tier 5 territory. You can maybe even talk me into like the bottom of tier 4 just because he would be the clear-cut running back one in this spot. So Tajay Spears becoming interesting. And then I have Jaylen Warren going up against the Ravens. Had an awful week 15, but prior to that had 5 games with at least 9 PBR points. You'd assume he'd get involved as a pass catcher. It's just unfortunate. He really has not found his footing this year. Seems like Arthur Smith is not super high on him. And then the last guy here that I didn't talk about, Audric Estime, running back 36. We have Tank Bigsby here going up against the Raiders. Talked about Travis Etienne. Bigsby's last 2 games, he's had 20 and 12 opportunities. That's somewhat interesting, especially in a close game where maybe he's starting to get that goal line work, more involved if they're not trailing. So Tank is going to come in here as my running back 35. And that's going to wrap it up for my top 36. Let me know your thoughts. Check out my updated wide receiver rankings. Posted the quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses yesterday. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.